Welcome to Underdog Rising with your host, Wade Posehn, where we ignite your journey from humble beginnings to greatness through inspiring tales of top executives and entrepreneurs. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Underdog Rising. Today, we have Andrew Wyant with us. He's the CEO of ISSA, which is the International Sports Sciences Association. And not only that, he is a board member of other institutions, and he's a serial entrepreneur, as well as a dad of 3 teens and a fitness enthusiast. Andrew, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So to jump into a quick fire round, what is one habit that has significantly improved your productivity?
Wake up early. I can't tell you how many times people sit there and they roll out of bed at 9, 10, and they've lost hours. I get up at 4:30 every morning. I work out at 5. I've started my day, and by 6:30, I feel like I've already accomplished so much that the rest of my day is set up for success.
Absolutely incredible. And I think that there's a shift within going from college into the real world that, sometimes you'll see individuals will schedule classes later in the day because they want to sleep in. But if you could adjust that early on, I think it'll really help your trajectory in life.
Right. And it seems like a crazy idea when you're in college. Why on earth would I get up early? I can sleep in. But the reality of it is if you want to get more out of life and you're making that transition, you need to make a few small changes in your life. And it's shocking how easy it is when you start moving that clock earlier. And then each day it becomes a habit.
Great habit to start. And then name a book every young professional should read from your perspective.
I love the 4 Agreements. And so if you haven't read the 4 Agreements, I would encourage every young person to read it because I think it's such a powerful story of telling you about what's important and what should these 4 key agreements that you make with yourself are. And the huge lesson from there to take away from is that it's not about you. It's not about you. And the more that you personalize things that happen in your life, the more that you imagine anything, you'll find that you're creating misery in your own life rather than living what you should be living. And so when you think about it a little bit more philosophically, and you start to assume good intent, and you start to operate from the standpoint of nothing that is happening is being done to you personally, it gives you freedom.
Yeah, I agree on that point. Life's not happening to you, it's happening for you. And I think a lot of individuals need to work on their mindset, and then everything else will sort of fall into place. What skill do you believe is essential for success in any career?
It's harder now than ever with the way that we live with social media, but teamwork. Teamwork is the kind of thing that comes not just from being in athletics and joining a team, but it comes from working with other people. And I don't care how good you are at some specific thing that you do, if you are unable to work in a team environment, you'll never be able to accomplish the things that you really want to accomplish in life. None of us do this alone. And so if I could encourage one skill, it would be to build that teamwork skill. And the only way to build the teamwork skill is to work in teams and to take that uncomfortable step to get out of the fact that I'm doing this on my phone, I'm reaching out to people, I'm texting them. If you're texting and you're communicating back and forth in some chat, that's not real teamwork. Real teamwork is when you're sitting down around the table and you're working through the questions and the issues, and you are face to face talking about the problem, whatever it is. If it's an assignment in class that you're finishing up in your senior year, if it then becomes a job related thing, the skill of teamwork is something that I think we're losing in some ways because of the fact that we don't tend to do it as much in our work lives. And that's one of the reasons why I think people who have been in athletics, especially team sports, will tend to have better career trajectories in some ways because they're used to working in teams.
I love that you touched on that point. How do you handle stress and maintain mental health?
I used to joke and tell people that I drink heavily, but now I can't even joke about that. What I would say today is that people need to find the right outlets. And for me, the outlet is working out. And it doesn't necessarily be the same for everybody because you might say, well, I really enjoy reading a book. I enjoy quiet time. I enjoy whatever it is. I think that your sword, like your scissors, it gets dull from using it. And the way that you're going to sharpen your sword is you're going to sharpen it by doing the other thing. the thing that is the counterbalance to whatever the action is that's causing you to wear down. And so if you're stressed out in your work environment and you just keep thinking, well, if I work harder, I'll feel less stress. Well, that's just not going to work. The way to reverse that is to say, well, what's the outlet I need? Is it going to be running? Is it going to be watching a movie? Is it going to be vegging out? But when you find that thing, understanding how to integrate it, and it's not a crutch, it's more of an integration into your life.
The piece that you touched on there about integration is a key point to lean into, because I think sometimes people do think they've got to add it in when it's just you find a way to integrate it into your life, such as maybe I go to sleep a little bit earlier, now I wake up earlier, right? And then you give that time to yourself, because the world does start to come alive around 8 o'clock, sometimes 7:30. So having that time to yourself is very important. What is the best piece of career advice that you have ever received?
It's such a great question, and I'm kind of an advice junkie, and so this is going to come out of left field. Are you ready? An army travels on its stomach. Okay. Now, an army travels on its stomach. Well, what does that mean? So we used to joke about this. I started out my career working for a strategy consulting firm called the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. And my manager there, a guy named Jim Andrews, he is now the head of sustainability for PepsiCo. And he would say this, and I always wondered what he was talking about. And what I came to realize pretty quickly is that you can't accomplish much if you're not replenishing and refueling and energizing yourself. And so before we would take on heavy duty assignments, before we would spend hours and hours working, we would have a meal together. And having that meal together created this bond between the team members. It created this sense of knowing and understanding each other. It created a relationship. But it also created the fuel. And if you're somebody like me who kind of bounces around and has high energy, it gave you the fuel to be able to keep going forward. And so the advice that I would give to you is that this idea of the army travels on its stomach is that you need to make sure that you are fueling yourself psychologically, physically, mentally, making sure that you're ready to go. And so I think that's advice that no one else is going to share. So there you go. Boom. You heard it here.
Incredible. You're absolutely correct. I don't think you will hear that information anywhere else, but it's fascinating because not only, to your point, is it literally fueling and energizing that individual and the team members involved, but it creates that bond and unity. So I appreciate you sharing that. What is the most important quality in a mentor?
It is like the magic mirror. You need honesty. If you are a mentor or if you're a mentee, the most important characteristic here is that someone can be caring, they could be thoughtful, they can be sincere, but if they're not honest, if you're not honest with your mentor and your mentor is not honest with you, then it's a wasted opportunity to improve. And a lot of times in mentor-mentee relationships, there's this goal of the mentee to look good and to make sure this person thinks highly of me because I respect them and they're important and they're whatever that may be. But the honesty is attached to vulnerability. And in the absence of that honesty, then you'll never really crack through to the things that will help you most in your career. And so if you're struggling with something, then you have a clear opportunity here. Be honest, share it. And you'll find that you're going to get the feedback that's going to help you be successful.
There's so many mentors out there, that kind of want to be mentors. But I think on your point, honesty is the key to it all, because then if somebody is not honest, it's a detriment to that individual or that mentee, because you're not really pushing them and helping them grow and walking down that hard path. So sort of on that same vein, how do you approach networking and building personal relationships?
I think that you have to begin with serving others. If you don't begin by service, if you start the situation in networking and professional relationships with what you want out of it, and if you start with what am I going to get from them, and where I'm going to a conference, what am I going to get out of it? If you start with that, I think you're going to wind up in a hollow place and you're not going to build deep relationships. If you start with, what can I bring to the table here? And if you're starting your career and you're, in your 20s and you're coming out of a college or whatever program, and you're thinking about we're going to a conference, what you bring is you bring energy, you bring perspective, you bring a new look, you bring enthusiasm. If you think about how you can approach that to say, gosh, you bring interest. Listening is one of those incredibly valuable skills. And so if you come at this saying, I'm going to serve, I'm going to listen, I'm going to absorb, then people who have something to share will then want to share it with you. They'll want to engage with you because you're genuinely caring and listening and trying to learn from them. And so in that kind of professional situation, if you really want to be connected and seen, then I would start with that idea of I'm here to serve, I'm here to help. And then other good things come at that. Another small point around that is so many people will come and ask for something. And if you think about, I'm asking for this, if you flip it around the other way, what is it that I'm bringing?
A lot of college kids, I think, have a challenge with identifying how they can sort of position themselves within the market because they feel like at times they haven't done anything actionable in order to deliver to folks, right? But what you touched on was really powerful because they themselves have value. They just have to do internal reflection to identify what that is and then bring that to the table, right? Fresh perspective, energy, etc. So how do you keep up with industry trends or developments?
It is harder than ever in some ways because if you look at your inbox for email, the number of newsletters and materials and things that come along, it is absolutely staggering. And it is challenging to sort through all of that. And so I probably am a little bit too much of a brute force person. I read a lot. And there are probably much better ways. And I hope that one of your listeners creates an AI system that will then go through my email box and absorb all of the various newsletters and materials and deliver to me precisely what I need to know each day. But in the meantime, I read.
I love that. I think it's a $1 million idea right there. As long as it can be tailored to that specific individual, very, very powerful. What's one thing you wish you knew when you started your career?
Everybody matters. I mean very specifically that when you are 20 something years old and you are working in a business, or maybe you start and you go to your training, everybody matters. How you treat people is everything, because the people who you are surrounded with there are people that you have no idea in that moment that they are going to be in your life 30 years later. In 1991, I had graduated from college and I went to work for the Boston Consulting Group. And I went to our training. I was in the Chicago office. And I went to our training in Boston. And we had, whatever it was, a week or 2 weeks of training then. And now in 2024, I went to a dinner in Phoenix, where I live here. And I go to the dinner, and the person across the table at one point talking, and he says, did you work for BCG? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, we were in the same training class 33 years ago. We spent about 2 weeks together 33 years ago, and to see how our lives have intersected and careers intersected, it's fascinating. And so no one said to me at the time that every one of these relationships matters. And I think we have a tendency in this life, and I say this mostly to a lot of your young college graduates and young people who are listening, we have a tendency to not try to make and keep those contacts and connections. And what I didn't know is not only does everybody matter, but trying to find a way to maintain some sort of contact over time is like gold. and it will further and advance your career in ways that you can't even know. And it is an investment where someone's going to tell you you should start putting money into your 401k as soon as you start working, and that will grow exponentially over your life. And that's true. Do that for everybody there. And when you think about your 401k and the compounding value of the interest gained, it's the same thing with the relationships you build.
Exactly. And that's all I always recommend to younger individuals to read The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, because that can be utilized in so many areas of life. That compounding interest is it's just massive. And I think that's where it also has a play on your career trajectory in itself, right? But tying back into your first point, delivering value, right? Don't just go in for the ask and use people, et cetera. Definitely foster those relationships and then build upon that over time and stay in touch. But that was very, very profound that individual remembered you almost, over after 30 plus years. And I think it's really shows the power of how you lead with serving others first, because your first impression impacted that individual, that they were able to remember you 30 plus years later. Now, granted, they might have followed you and seen you across social media platforms, et cetera. But even in order to take that action within itself, you made a big impact, which is really great.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and truly, in the interest of making sure that it's a humbling experience. But I think the thing that you could take away, everyone can do, is that you have an opportunity to make a first impression in every situation, and that first impression is one where if you greet someone, you feel awkward, you feel unusual, you're in this situation, it's a new job, it's a new place, whatever. But if you think about it from that same standpoint of, what can I bring to this? You're going to light somebody's life, day, week, whatever up in a positive way, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything, and you benefit from it.
So true. It is free. That is so great. And then lastly, sort of just on this quick fire round, specifically related to your field and industry, what is a common misconception about your field?
So the first misconception is that I'm going to start with personal trainers. Personal trainers pull the pin and count to 10. Right? What is a personal trainer? They pull the pin, they put it in, they count to 10. That's what it is. A great personal trainer is going to inspire you. A great personal trainer is going to hold you accountable. A great personal trainer is going to really help you be your best and move your best. And you can know everything you possibly could about fitness and exercise, and almost everyone would benefit from working with a personal trainer. It is a profoundly life-changing experience to become a personal trainer and then to receive personal training. The second misconception is that personal training is filled with a bunch of meatheads, and that the people who go into it are, muscle bound and, aren't thoughtful, caring, and considerate. And so I think those two misconceptions, that personal training is not a thoughtful, helpful profession, and that it's filled with people who are just focused on themselves and their muscles. The majority of personal trainers you're going to encounter are much more concerned about you and your body and helping you move than they are about their own.
Those are out there in the industry, but it's great to hear from somebody such as yourself who deals with that on a day-to-day basis and works with those folks, right? Because there is so much value that is given by personal trainers. I've actually worked with some myself that goes above and beyond, say, counting the reps and telling you exactly what to do. I mean, you're working with that individual that has been trained and coached through so much, even beyond the ligaments and the muscles that are actually within your body itself. So I appreciate you running through that quick fire round. That was a lot of fun. So to sort of shift things now, I know we've gone through a lot of info, but if you can just walk us through a summary of your career so that the listeners can better understand who you are and what you've done.
I was born in Hamilton, Ohio, which is a industrial town outside of Cincinnati, and my parents were both deaf, so they could not hear or speak. And so growing up with my father as a factory worker and my mother as a homemaker, My father worked 3 different jobs. So he worked in the factory all day. He'd come home, have dinner, and then he would go to clean doctor's offices. So he worked as a janitor in doctor's offices and banks and things like that. In fact, as a kid, I thought it was amazing that my dad had the keys to the bank in town. So he would go in, and I'm about to reveal something here on your podcast that no one else has ever heard. I would go in and steal a lollipop from the bank because they had lollipops back then. So when my dad would clean, I would take a lollipop. And I'm sure they would have given it to me for free if I had been there, but it was very different, being able to go into the bank in the middle of the night. So my career, when I was very young, I watched my dad working so hard in his factory, and being a deaf man, he was exceptionally bright, but he was born in 1922. And so when the Great Depression started, he would have been 7 years old. So his experiences were largely cast by the Great Depression. So when I was 14 years old, I started my first business. And my father was so supportive of me doing whatever I wanted to do. He wanted to see me just thrive and grow. And starting a business at the time, it was I saw that my school was trying to do fundraisers, and we'd sold all kinds of crappy things. And I thought, well, what if we did an entertainment book? So I went to stores and restaurants and got coupons and put it together in a coupon book that I printed, and then wound up having the school and other organizations and churches and other groups sell the coupon book to make money. Now, for your listeners, imagine that there were paper coupons once. Everything wasn't digital. There wasn't at all QR codes. There were actually books of coupons that existed, as crazy as that may seem. So I knew that I wanted to build a business. I knew I wanted to be in charge. I knew that I wanted to drive these things, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. So I went on to try and start a couple of other businesses. One, in high school, we worked almost doing intercept surveys, focus groups, and things for companies, which was fascinating because we largely got a bunch of high school students to go to malls and ask people questions, and we would get paid for doing that. So all of that led me to saying, gosh, I want to be an entrepreneur. And so I went to college at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School of Business, and I studied entrepreneurship. And so I share this for all of your listeners. The thing that I took away from studying entrepreneurship is that I should go get more experience. I took away from that I should find a way to get more money, get a financing, build a basis. I think that was terrible advice. I think that, if you're motivated to go do it, learning is very important. And I would never minimize that, and developing some level of knowledge and expertise about how things work. But if you try to go the route of, I'm going to learn everything I can in a business, you're going to have your entire career inside of a corporation. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if your dream is to be an entrepreneur, you need to be an entrepreneur. If your dream is to be a writer, you know what you should do? Write. So I just say to everybody out there who's listening to this and says, well, should I go study entrepreneurship? Should I go get a job? Should I get experience? Yes, that's all great. But you need to know when you're going to pull the ripcord and go do the thing that you are passionate about doing. And so from my career perspective, after studying entrepreneurship, I thought, well, I really need to get a job to get experience. And so I got a wonderful job at a great place, the Boston Consulting Group. I worked as a management consultant. That led me to a strategy job inside of a large corporation, which then led me on to the point where when I was in my late 20s, I saw an opportunity in the portfolio of companies that we were in. And the opportunity was in baking. Now, if you think about baking, especially fresh bread at the time, there were not a lot of strong brands. If you went up and down the aisle, even today, if you went into a grocery store, you looked around at the brands, you'd look up and down and there might be brands that are attractive or whatever, but there weren't brands there that were jumping out at you and saying, this is a brand that you know and trust, and I'm going to buy this bread. So I went to the folks at Pillsbury and convinced them to let us license the Pillsbury Doughboy. And then I went to ConAgra, which owned Healthy Choice, and I convinced them to license to us the Healthy Choice brand name. So we started producing Pillsbury fresh bread and Healthy Choice fresh bread, and totally changed the financial picture of this baking business, making it dramatically more profitable because we were now borrowing the credibility of these big brands and bringing them to the bread aisle. For a variety of reasons, those things have gone different directions over time, and the business that I was with has been acquired. But the early part of my career was largely spent getting tons of hard experience, hard work, nose down to the grindstone. I joke about this, but my first year of consulting, if you take just quick math here, 40 hours a week, and you have 52 weeks a year, that's 2,080 hours, 52 times 40. In my first year as a consultant, I billed to the clients 3,000 hours. So that is just hard work all the time, keep driving it. And so what that worked out to is I was averaging about 60 hours of work, billing, every week for 50 weeks. So I say that to the listeners because there's a generational shift that has come that I think is meaningful, and I'm not dismissing it or being negative about it, but if the idea that you have is that the most important thing about your work is that you'll have a wonderful work-life balance, work-life integration, and you think that it's really important that when you leave the office or you leave your job that you're not taking it home, it's not going to interfere with the rest of your life, and you're going to create separation. That's great, and that's a really terrific place to be, and I applaud you for that. That is not going to make you successful in building your own business. That's not going to make you successful in really climbing. It can give you a wonderful life and career. So there's no negatives about that. It's a question of what do you want? So the summary of my career is this. It was a random set of surprising events that led me from being in a large food company into the baking business, into the golf industry as an entrepreneur, to ultimately into a business of creating direct response commercials and infomercials, which then led me into creating programming for online gambling operations to help people connect with gambling operations, which I don't support, by the way. For the record, for all of your listeners, we had a saying in the online gambling space, which is everybody bets. But inside the company, what we said is everybody loses. And I say that because if what you are thinking is that if you think betting on sports is like investing in the stock market, then you're missing a major point. The house always wins. And mathematically, over a period of time, what we found when I was in the online gambling space, especially in sports gambling, is that in the first year, 90% of all of the people who play sports bets lost. Of the 10% of the people who won money gambling over their first year, 90% of them lost money the next year. So what that basically leads you to is 1% of the people who were gambling on sports made money, and 99% over a period of time lost money. Now, if you say it's entertainment and you're betting on your team because you love it and you think it's more exciting, et cetera, that's fine. You can also set your money on fire if you want.
I mean, it's common saying, right? The house always wins, but people don't take that into account because they always look at it on an individual level, very micro, where that industry looks at it at a macro level. Like we're not looking at one individual person, we're looking at the entirety. So we might lose over there, but we're still winning ultimately at the end of the day. Otherwise, they wouldn't all be in business.
Exactly.
It's very fascinating that you are in the health and fitness industry. Obviously, I think over time, we've definitely seen more of a shift. This is my own perspective, just into health and fitness itself. So ultimately, what inspired you to enter the health and fitness industry?
So my daughter was born when I was 40 years old. So no children prior to that point. And when she was born, I went to see a physician, and the physician was this extraordinarily attractive Brazilian woman. And, Brazilians, in some instances, have there's a high degree of plastic surgery that you might find, and that's not a generalization among all Brazilians, but this person had that experience, and she did all my tests, and she looked at me, and she came back, and I was 60 pounds heavier then than I am today. And my cholesterol level was elevated. And she looked at me and said, well, at 40 years old, I'm going to put you on Lipitor, and you're going to take these drugs to help reduce, your cholesterol levels. And, you probably should be taking a statin, to reduce your risk of heart disease. And I just thought to myself, are you kidding me? And so I said to her, I said, well, wait a minute. And before I start taking a drug for the rest of my life, and even if it's effective and safe, et cetera, shouldn't I, change my lifestyle and, do this to try to improve myself? And she said, she started laughing. She started laughing at me because she said, well, people say that all the time, but most people don't change. So I thought to myself, oh, so this is a challenge, right? This is now we're talking. This is what's competition. So now I'm going to actually have to try to do the things to make sure that I can actually deliver on this. So I left her, and she said I'd come back in 3 months. I cut out a lot of the things that I was eating, like Cajun ribeye steaks that I would have 4 or 5 nights a week, which are delicious, but I don't eat red meat like that anymore. And it inspired me to make the change in my life. And what I found was losing 60 pounds required baby steps. And, you can look at Atomic Habits, and you can look at the science of habit change, and you can look at all kinds of things. But for me, I could not at that point run to the end of the block. And so I set out some very small things: run to the end of the block, add a 1/10 of a mile every day. At the end of 10 days, I could run a mile. At the end of 20 days, I could run 2 miles. At the end of 30 days, I ran 3 miles. I intentionally didn't add more. It was literally just adding specifically that much each day, so that I knew that what I was going to get out of this is a consistent progress moving forward. And it worked. All of the weight came off, and it moved in the right direction. And it was, exactly what I was looking for. So, at the end of the day, what drove me into the health and fitness industry was my own situation, and making sure that I could live the best life for my daughter, who is now 15 years old. And I've never looked back.
No, that's so inspiring, because it's very powerful to hear each individual's story and those pivotal moments that they go through in their life. And I think it's really incredible that you weren't a part of the regular statistics, right? Of folks that actually would not make the change. They would just sit there and take the, drugs that are prescribed. You actually went out, whether it was your mentality is like, I got to take this as a competition and now prove to myself that I can get it done and be sort of on the better side of that stat. But I thank you so much for being vulnerable and just sharing that element of your life. It kind of inspired a question. You have a saying, I believe, at ISSA that you mentioned on another podcast that was very intriguing, that kind of relates to helping others. You led into a point that was very great around you help inspire folks to help others.
So, the interesting thing is that I personally feel like I'm in the health and wellness and fitness industry, but I don't actually work with any individual client myself. I'm not specifically myself changing anybody's life. And one of the things that I think is foundational is this notion that we can create this butterfly effect, right? We can create this effect where when you live and share wellness, what you can do is you can create a change in other people. And so as an individual person, my family reacts to and responds to how I live my life. And for each one of you who are listening to this today, the people around you, whether it's your coworkers, your students, your roommates, your friends, your family, when you make a change in your life and you live it out, it's seen, it's experienced. It's not a question of you preaching. And I'm a big believer that the idea here is not to preach to other people about what they should or shouldn't do. It is to demonstrate it and to live it. And when you live that way, other people see it and they respond to it and they say, well, gosh, how can I get that? How can I have that energy to get up at 4:30 in the morning? How can I achieve this relationship? How can I achieve these things? And it's not, there's no magic to any of it. It's not like there's some secret, and there's certainly nothing that separates me from any other person. And that's the part about the humanity that we all have, is that we all share these same things and we all are capable of doing amazing things, and it's unlocking that potential. Earlier on, I said, if you want to be a writer, you need to write. But period. You pick whatever, put that first blank and put the second blank in there. You want to be a songwriter? You know what you do? You write songs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just about putting in action. I always learned, like, ages ago back in college, during sort of a math class, a professor once mentioned to me, like, son, this equation isn't going to solve itself. Like, you have to put in the work, whether it be right or wrong. You have to put in that work, and then it will solve it'll work itself out, and you'll get to that ultimate answer and that conclusion. So I think people need to also just lean into that. And then over time, you'll find what works for you, and that will come into shape for yourself. And then also, at ISSA, your company does 12 minutes of gratitude every week, and people share what they're grateful for during that time. I think that's exceptional, by the way. Do you think it's important for the younger generation to sort of engage with that mentality?
Thank you for asking that question, because I would put a huge exclamation point behind that. My daughter would share with you that before every evening meal, we share what we are grateful for in that day. And I think that's a simple thing. You can take a note and write a note and just drop in each day something that you're grateful for. I've seen people do like a little jar, and they'll write in and they'll fill the jar with their elements of gratitude. The act of stopping for a moment, even in that sense of saying, when you're sitting down to have, last night we had sushi, and I said, I'm grateful for sushi chefs, because I was imagining the people who go in there and they learn all this, and they learn about how their knives are and how the cuts of the fish and how to roll it and how to create it. Like, it's an art. And I'm grateful that people do that, because they create something that's beautiful and delicious, and I love it. And my life is better for the fact that that person has studied sushi making.
Exactly. And it is incredible to take that time to just reflect, because so often we look at the present time that we're in, but we don't realize that probably not even 6 months ago, if we're relating this to career elements, that we were asking or wanting to be in the position or where we currently are in life, because we don't take that time to reflect and also be grateful. Like, I went through those hard times that actually shaped me to become the individual that I am today. So I appreciate you touching on that. And it's really powerful that you implement something like that in your guys' company, because we don't take enough time to stop, especially as, employees or in our career life.
And, it's funny, I wanted to add one thing to that. And this has been said in lots of different ways by different folks, but we wildly overestimate what we can do today or this weekend, and we wildly underestimate what we can do in 6 months or a year. And I say that because when you are coming out of college, or you're early in your career, a lot of times things seem so daunting. And gosh, I'm going to be in this program for 2 years. Oh, it's going to be a 2-year program. I mean, but then you step back and say, well, I'm going to completely redo my closet this weekend, or I'm going to, paint the house, or whatever that might be. When it's unrealistic to think that you can get that done today. But if you said, I'm going to paint every house in the neighborhood in the next 6 months, you could do that, right? And so when it comes to your own life and your career, when you start creating a mindset both of gratitude for what you have today, and understanding and appreciation for what that is, and then a recognition that is a step. It's like that pebble. It's the next thing that you need to get to. So if I connected it back to kind of my career in health and fitness, I believe that if you can be grateful for your body, and you can be grateful that you move, you can be grateful that you have this opportunity, and then you start to realize that you cannot lose 60 pounds. Well, you could lose 60 pounds today, but you'd have to have something cut off your body. um, but if you actually wanted to lose 60 pounds and lose it in a healthy way, you probably are looking at somewhere between 30 and 60 weeks worth of consistent work where you're consuming fewer calories than you are expending.
Once again, tying back into your compounded interest, right? And I think in this day and age with social media and just the having information so readily available, I think sometimes it stops people in their tracks because they think that it's got to be instant when 9 times out of 10 it is absolutely not. So with you being in the health and fitness industry, is there a legacy that you hope to leave in the health and fitness industry?
I sure do. When I started in personal training at NASM, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, I ran that business for 5 years before I left and then started working with ISSA. And there were two things I wanted to share about kind of my now almost 12 years in fitness. The first is that 12 years ago, personal training was probably 10% of the size that it is today. And the legacy that I hope to have left is the idea that none of us do this alone, and that if you can have a partner, a coach, someone to walk along with you that will help you, that you can create a truly positive symbiotic relationship. And it doesn't have to be forever; it can be for a period of time. But I think that the legacy that I'll have left behind is that between the two companies that I've run, we've now certified over 1 million people to become personal trainers. And if those 1 million people worked with 20 to 30 clients, then 20 to 30 million people's lives have been made better by working with a personal trainer. Now, there are 320 or 360 million people, or whatever the number is right now, in America. So is this 30 million a lot? It's not enough. There should be more.
I like how you put that. It's not enough because you're not depleting the fact that it's still 30 million people, right? Out of 328 million or so folks, but it's still in the right direction. But there's more opportunity there to go and help influence individuals. That's very, very powerful. So you've mentioned that like after many successes and also some failures, right? You've realized that you're passionate about three main things. That's helping others, being creative, and just constantly learning and improving. Have you always been passionate about those, or did you grow into those over time?
I would say to you, it's completely a growth. I wish I could tell you that early in my career, I had any desire to help others. I was so largely focused on myself and in such a selfish way that, whenever anybody says something nice about me from, my life, I think to myself, wow, that's amazing. I was such a selfish a-hole, or I was literally trying to do this for myself. And so part of what I hope to share here with the listeners is that the observation, the change in my life. I wish I could say to you, I did this all because I did it perfectly, right? What I'm hoping people learn from is my mistakes. My mistakes were that I didn't focus on others. I didn't start with that. I didn't understand. I thought that I should make a lot of money. And my goal was set to be making a lot of money. And then I came to realize that, being creative and, enjoying what you do is so much more powerful. I say being creative for me could be different for other people, but finding the things that you care about becomes meaningful. What I think you find out about that teamwork point and the selfishness point is that when you see that you can't do it by yourself, you pound your head against the wall enough times and you say, gosh, this hurts. Maybe I should do something different.
And I think something we've seen as well is you have a tendency, even throughout this whole entire conversation, to be able to focus on the positive, right? And you've done a lot of work on your mindset, even from when you were talking about the situations you grew up with in Ohio and et cetera, and just all throughout your career. But one question that always keeps coming to the top of my mind is, how do you have such a positive mindset? Often at times people will go through, my rejection, they get denied for a job or even personal situations, but this whole time everything's been really positive and framed in that element. Like, how are there any tips or tricks, or how do you just stay positive all the time?
I appreciate you suggesting that I stay positive all the time. I think that everybody experiences loss. There are tragedies. I think being able to understand. So, my parents are both gone, and we've had kind of personal and family loss, and you have professional loss, and you have challenges, and I think there's not a singular secret. I do believe very much in the idea of get to versus have to. The get to mindset versus I have to. If you can take most any situation and flip it exactly, I have to do this as opposed to I get to. Well, when you start to play that all the way through, and you play through the gratitude that I get to be here, I am unbelievably honored and amazed that Wade, that you would have some interest in something that I have to say. Like, I get to talk to you, and I get to share some of my own life experiences with your podcast listeners, because of the fact that I've made so many mistakes in my life. I've screwed up so many things. And because I never let a single one of those failures define me, I get to move on. I get to have the opportunity to try the next thing. I get the chance to see, well, what would be on the other side of this failure? And if I thought I was a failure, and then I have to live as a failure, I have to live as the consequences of an action that I took that was, irresponsible or negative or whatever. The idea that there's a human walking the earth today who is perfect, it doesn't exist, and none of us are. And so if we then look at this and say, I get to learn from my mistakes, right? I get another chance because I'm still alive and I'm still here on this space in this world. And so in the worst possible situations, in the darkest days when I thought bankruptcy was looming, I had $1 million on my credit cards, where I thought, how in the world am I ever going to pay this? And I learned that by keeping that to myself and not sharing it with others, I was carrying all the burden and all the stress. And so I get to make the situation better by sharing it with others. I get to have an opportunity. And however the financial piece of it results, then if you can wake up again tomorrow, then you get to have a chance to change things. And so that's the positivity, is that I get to try it again. I get to do it another way. I get to try something else.
And that's very powerful for the younger generation to learn, because they're at that age. Personally, I feel like you have more of that mindset of life is happening to me, not for me. And you've got to learn to change that perspective, because you feel like everything is like the entire weight of the world is on your shoulders, because you're trying to define yourself, whether it's career or even in the personal life. And that's why it's great to always seek out a mentor, potentially who is older than you, so that they can help you with that mindset shift and just bounce ideas and work through that mindset shift as well. So I know we've spoken about mentors as well throughout our conversation, but what role has mentorship played in your career, and do you mentor others?
So I'm embarrassed to say that I don't actively mentor people today. And I'm embarrassed to say this because I think mentorship and mentoring is incredibly important. And it's something that's on my mind on a regular basis. The way I've acted as a mentor primarily has been in demonstrating and creating opportunities inside of the businesses and connecting with people who've reached out to me for help. I think there's a valuable part of mentorship relationship, which is consistency, and it's a relationship that's it's not contractual, but I think it needs to be ongoing and consistent. So if you talk to people who have been on the teams and I've worked with over my career, I would hope that all of them said that I was a great mentor to them, but I think that I could always have done better by taking it the next step and continuing to engage over time. And so that's an area I'd like to make better for myself as I go forward in life. And I'd love to study mentorship, because there could be another chapter in my life in the future where I help promote mentorship, period, around the world, because I think that there's so much value and is so underrepresented today.
Yeah, and I think to some degree, I think sometimes when we're in I don't want to say lower, but when you're more of a CEO or an executive, I think there's also an opportunity to you're able to influence more people just by who you are and what you do, right? To your point way earlier about how, when personal trainers are helping individuals get better within their personal lives, they walk around feeling healthier and more energized, right? And I think that's what people in your position will do as well. Like,
Exactly.
why is he that way, right? How is Andrew so positive? How come he looks at life in a different way? And then through you, I think you influence a lot of people. But yeah, maybe just that one-on-one situation is a little different at times. But also to that point, you folks are very busy, right? Time gets occupied because your hands are in many different buckets.
You're too kind. You're helping me feel like I feel better about myself. So thank you. Um, I thank you for saying that. But at the same time, I think there's still a role for a structured mentorship relationship. And on one of your other podcasts, you had Tammy Neely, who's amazing, and Tammy and I have the chance to work together. And Tammy is such a great mentor. And one of the things that she does so well, though, is she puts it on her mentee. I'm here for you in all these ways. You have to do the work to drive this, and I will be here for you. And I think that's a really powerful and meaningful thing too.
Yeah, because it's almost they have to seek it out, and then it's a drive behind them in order to develop that relationship. I am where I am, and I've been through certain things, so show some interest, and then I will help shape and guide you through it all. That's really great. So involved in a lot of that too is, goal setting, right? Throughout life, there's times where we want to achieve something, whether it be health and fitness or in our personal life and our careers. So for an individual who is where you are today, how do you approach goal setting and tracking progress in your personal life or in your career?
Every single day, I think goals are critical. And you'll hear about a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. I think that in the absence of goals, it's very hard to think about where you're headed. And Winston Churchill is given credit for this quote that I think is amazing. Planning is invaluable, and plans are worthless. Okay? Planning is invaluable, and plans are worthless. So the exercise of going through all the work that you have to do to plan to get to your goal, right, is critical. It's critical in your business. It's critical in your life. You go through this. But the plan itself is a piece of paper, or it's a file on your computer. The outside world has a say. Right? Everything else that happens in the world has a say in your plans. And so then your plans are going to go haywire the moment that you write them. And so the critical part about the goal is that you can't lose sight of what that goal is, because you created a plan, and that plan's out the window. Mike Tyson, this may be the first time Mike Tyson's quoted on your podcast. Mike Tyson has a great quote, and he says, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face."
I love that.
So, the advice to the folks here is to say, look, create the goal and make the goal big. Make the goal big, and understand that some people talk about realistic goals versus unrealistic goals. And I think that there's magical thinking. To me, a goal has to be things that you could create a plan, that you could do the planning to achieve it. And so if I said to you that I would like to be the president of the United States, and I'd like to represent a new generation, then the exercise that I would have to go through is not to say, boy, it'd be great to be president of the United States. Right? I would sit down and go through the planning process. Okay, well, what are the requirements? What do I need to do? How do I build X, Y, and Z? Should I run for a lower office, and go through this? So if your goal is to be president, then you're going to go backwards and say, okay, I have all these plans. Well, I do all this planning. And then you say, okay, well, my first step in this was that I'm going to run for my community, I don't know, mayor of this town, right? So I'm going to run for mayor, and maybe you don't win, right? This is where the plan is meaningless. The planning is important. So now I'm establishing myself in politics, and I'm getting to know people in whatever parties that you're affiliated with, and then you're building a network, and you see what I mean? So if you're 20 something starting down the road, you can create that. You can't say that your goal is to be Bono of U2, right? Because there's only one Bono.
So, still staying in line on that same point, because that quote was fascinating. Has there ever been a moment in your career where you have been punched in the face?
Oh gosh, I've been punched in the face so many times. That's why my nose is crooked. Um, the I think that the biggest one for me was I can think of three big failures. So poker became a craze, and this is going back into probably be early 2000s, and poker had become a craze, and there was the World Series of Poker was getting on television, and there was a lot of things going on, and so I thought, well, look, I've made a lot of inroads in building great direct response television ads and online ads. And so a partner of mine and I created what we called the Ultimate Poker Company. And we went out and got Vince Van Patten, who had been a host of the World Series of Poker. And we got Chris Moneymaker, who had won a bracelet. And we got a bunch of other big poker stars. And we created a video series to teach people how to play poker. And then we created accessories to go with it. And we put this thing on the air. We raised money from investors, and there was sort of an initial, oh, maybe this could work. And then it became just an abject failure, and it was just awful, and it felt so personal to me. I was losing my money, and I was losing the investors' money, and it went completely down the tubes. We shut it down, and we lost all our money. And, I look at that and say, okay, well, back to being positive. I learned some incredible lessons there. I learned lessons around, when to fold. I learned lessons about communications with our investors, because we did not do a great job of communicating to our investors of what our status and situation was. I learned lessons about my own tolerance for fear, because I started to look for a job so that I could work and have an income, even though I was trying to run the business, because I was afraid that the business is going to fail. Well, I helped make sure the business failed by distracting myself from trying to be fully present. And so when you think about those are heavy, weighty lessons, right? But the very next thing that I did after that became a wildly successful business. And it became a wildly successful business because a lot of the things I learned from those failures, I was able to directly apply. And so I got to have a chance to do it again. And, then I got to do it again and again. And the lessons learned weren't fully absorbed, right? I didn't just get the lesson and walk away and I got it perfectly. It took me a much, much longer time to understand that when I'm talking to investors and partners, et cetera, 100% transparency, complete honesty is the only way. I tried so hard to hide my mistakes. I tried so hard to not reveal where I didn't know things. And that gives people the impression that you're being dishonest or deceitful. And so the lessons learned from that were, again, lessons the hard way. I didn't create the right impression. I didn't show up as an authentic person because I wasn't being completely honest. I joke about it today that I don't have to think much about what I say because I just tell the truth. And then I don't have to remember the story because there is no story. It's just the facts.
Very true. And that highlights communication. I think communication is very powerful. It's also how you say things, and the English language can be manipulated in many different ways by the words that you use. But I appreciate you going into that, because I think honesty and communication touches on multiple different touch points within life, whether it be personal or professional in itself. But I like the focus of how you did not give up, right? Like, yeah, there were those moments you were looking for a job, etc. But I always personally say that, and it's true for everyone, usually the first time is always the hardest, and you're investing in yourself, whether that be monetarily or time wise. Don't go now and turn away from that and try and start something else unless you've fully gone through with it, because you are investing in yourself. It will get easier over time, and I think that's why so many folks in life say, love the process, love the journey, because that end goal is great, but once you get there, you've achieved it. Now what, right? But obviously that goal will shift, but it's just working through that process, because things are not always going to be easy, and just be persistent through it all. So within the health and fitness industry, for those that are listening today, what advice do you have to those young aspiring professionals if they want to enter the health and fitness industry?
I would say, number one, and this is true of what I look for in employees, and I would say that when I meet someone, one of the most striking characteristics around someone and someone entering the health and fitness industry is that you are curious, that you're interested, that you're learning. And if you show up with whatever experience you have, but if you're interested, if you're curious, if you're trying to learn, if you're thinking about, it's back to that kind of comment that I make a lot, which is I focus on helping others and being creative and learning and improving. I look for in other people, not necessarily that they're being creative. I mean, that's wonderful. But if you're not interested in learning and improving, then you are probably useless in a job, flat out. And so if you can show to an employer that you're interested in learning and improving, and follow through by actually learning and improving, then you're going to go far. When it comes to the fitness industry, my advice to people entering it is that is important, learning and improving. My second piece of advice, and this is pretty overwhelming, and it's bad news for a lot of people who feel like they are very introverted. It is impossible to build a business without having some degree of sales. Now, exactly. You don't have to be the most extroverted person in the world, but you cannot build a business without sales. So now selling can be done in lots of different ways. It can be done online. It can be done, whatever your business may be. But I think people lose sight of this, where I don't know if sales got a bad name at some point. I don't know if the idea of being in sales was somehow dismissed, as not being as engaging, intriguing, whatever. But there is not a company in this world that exists without sales. And so therefore, you could say to yourself, if I'm going into health and fitness, I need to understand that for the most part, everybody in the industry is in sales. And you can sell in lots of different ways. You can sell in a way that works for you, but you're going to be in a sales job.
Yeah, very spot on, because it kind of ties back to your earlier point around working in a team, and when you talk about selling online and everyone's in a sales position, that sort of pulls away the soft skills, right? Because like, even say for now, you and I are having a great conversation. It's through an online medium, phenomenal. But if we were here sitting across from one another, that's even more powerful, right? And I think some folks this day and age are losing that soft skill. Let me have a conversation with someone. Let me truly connect with them. And I think that's incredible within the health and fitness industry, especially within the personal training, is you get that time to connect with people, right? And they do go above and beyond and help people even outside of just their physical fitness. You're having a conversation, then they become a therapist, right? Because they're talking about life, because they get to know each other over time. So it's very interesting, and it's great for folks to know that they need those soft skills. Sort of as we round out here, would you have any recommendations or tips or advice on how someone could go about applying to certain positions within the health and fitness industry, whether that be, reaching out to people or updating a resume in a certain way and adding certain limits? Like, how can they stand out?
I love this question, Wade. I love it so much because a lot of young people have gotten to this experience of the online application process where thousands or tens of thousands of resumes are all getting fed through, and there are filters and systems. And so I have three thoughts for you. First of all, there are a lot of people out there who are expert in the world of how do you get past the AI filters that exist today around your resumes. So I would tune your resume to make sure that you are matching to what the job's looking for, right? And that's pretty easy to do, because if you have the job description and you compare it to your own resume, you can understand what they're looking for. So that's a technical piece around it. And again, that's not my expertise, but I would say to you, I would look for the folks who are expert at that. The second thing is, for me, it's a critical one, which is back to all this relationship stuff. I've talked about relationships here a lot. Aside from applying to the Boston Consulting Group, I have never actually applied for another job in my entire professional career. Not once. And what happens is that, if I'm looking for a job or I was looking for an opportunity, I would be talking to people, and I would be connecting, and I'd be networking, and I'd be doing all those things that then lead to this person, knows about this, or that person knows about that. And I think that there is a lot of magic to that. And don't think those are two separate points, right? There's a whole technology point around your resume and getting it in there for a job. And that's a bit of a game to try to get through a process. The flip side of that is you're trying to create a personal connection. I'm going to share something that I probably haven't shared anywhere else before, is that over the last 5 years, up until this past year, I have written a handwritten note to all of the employees of ISSA. And what I try to do with that handwritten note is I try to find something that I know about that person, or I've heard about that person, where I could comment on it. And to write a handwritten note, to do the math of this for a second, because I love math. If I'm writing 3 sentences and I'm writing their name and I'm giving some thought to it, it probably takes me about a minute to write the card. And then it takes me about a minute to address the card and stick a stamp on it. And so let's assume it takes 2 minutes. And in the case of having 150 employees at the time, we now have over 300, but at 150 employees and at 2 minutes, you're talking about 300 minutes. So 300 minutes in this situation, you're talking about 5 hours. So I could spend 5 hours over the course of a year. Put that into weeks, it's nothing, but I would typically do it on one weekend day in 5 hours. Every single one of those people who receive that note knows that I care about them and that I'm connected to them. And when a person who is listening to this podcast, thinks about how you could establish a relationship with someone, think about the impact of getting a handwritten note that has 3 sentences in it. And I would challenge every single one of you who hears this to write a singular note to a singular person, to send it out there and see what happens. And I think you will be blown away at the impact. It is not a text. Text is not an excuse. An email is not a way to do this. And so when you're talking about getting a job, if you're asking for somebody's help, or if you are thanking someone for their time, or you're putting this in there, writing that handwritten note will blow their minds, because the other 4 million people who are currently 18, or 4 million people who are 19 or 20 years old, there might be 40 people out of those 4 million who will do this. And you will set yourself apart in a way that no one else can touch.
You are so right, because the world lacks that this day and age. And it's just now it seems like it's the wildest thing to do, But it back in the day, it was like that's what you did. You had pen to paper. That wasn't that was the easiest form of communication, but now not so much. And I think even when we look at how do you stand out from the crowd, take that time if you can. I mean, information is online. Maybe it's not directly to the person or the hiring manager, but maybe you identify, if people are physically in the office, go in, drop off a note, not just your resume, and then ask if it can be, given to that hiring manager or that person. And they will most likely take the time to read it because nobody gets mail like that these days. So I appreciate you going into that because it is really important. So I know we covered a lot, and I really, really appreciate your time spent with us here. And you have just delivered so much valuable information. And it's just been great that vulnerability has been accompanied with it too. And that's how I think a lot of this younger generation can learn. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you and what you're doing here in this podcast and the way in which you're trying to help a lot of people advance their careers and advance their lives. And so I'm grateful to you for doing this.